Welcome to the Great Man Within podcast. Every episode is designed to help you discover and live the great man within you. Oh man, today we are talking about one of the former banes of my existence, doing things out of obligation. Guys, I used to be pro at doing things that I didn't want to do because I felt I was obligated to do them. And now as a leader of other men, I have an opportunity to see so many guys whose lives are stretched thin because of all the responsibilities and obligations that are on their plate and how exhausted men are from doing things they don't want to do but feel they have no other choice to do so. And I want to, by the end of this conversation today, expose and illuminate how much more time, energy, and your life force is being drained from you, more than you can recognize by doing things out of obligation. And I want to jump into a story here in a second about something I did out of obligation recently and how it really exposed for me how much more time and energy actually was stripped from me than appeared on the surface. Now, one of the other reasons why I'm so passionate about talking about this is in my new book, On Purpose Leadership, which is just gotten ready available for pre-order. You can get it online right now, On Purpose Leadership. I talk about this key principle of your greatest energy. A man who is living on purpose needs to know the things that give him his greatest energy. These are the things that you are good at, great at, that you lose a sense of time. There's a sense of effortlessness. You're in a state of flow. And if you were doing these things all day long, when you came home from, let's say, a day of work of doing this in your greatest energy, you wouldn't be exhausted. You may be physically tired, but emotionally your tank would be full. And the game that I challenge you to play in the book is, can you organize more and more of your life around the things that give you your greatest energy? Because when you do, life becomes easier, more vibrant, more exciting. There's no more exhaustion or fatigue. It's replaced with things that you're passionate about. You feel a sense of purpose, on purpose leadership, mastering the art of leading yourself so you can inspire and impact others. So anything that gets you away from your greatest energy is, quite frankly, a disservice to yourself, a disservice to your family, to your business, because you are not operating at your fullest potential. So, speaking as a former expert in doing things out of obligation, let me first set the context for you about what obligation really is and what it isn't. Most of what we call obligation is simply our inability to say no, our inability to deal with discomfort because we fear reprisal, we fear some sort of negative blowback, we fear an argument. The textbook definition of obligation is a moral or ethical responsibility, right? Think about this for a second. An obligation is something that you are morally or ethically responsible for doing. Now, most of what we call obligation doesn't meet that criteria, doesn't meet that standard. Most of what we feel as obligatory or something that's an obligation is purely our inability to say no to something. Case in point, from my life, here's something that happened recently. So I said yes to taking a 30-minute meeting that I really didn't want to take. I couldn't figure out what was in it for me. It seemed like it was kind of a one-way street where someone wanted to pick my brain on something, and the energy behind it didn't feel good for me. But when the presentation was made for this 30-minute commitment of my time, what happened in a split second, I wasn't able to see it until I unpacked this afterwards, was on one hand, I felt this acute pain of having to say no. The potential blowback or reprisal or the energy drain of dealing with the discomfort was in this one hand. It was a really potent feeling. Versus on the other hand was this, but it's only 30 minutes of my time. That's not right now, and it's in the future. And I didn't feel that nearly as profoundly as I did that acute pain of having to say no. So in that moment, like that split second, I said yes. And this 30-minute meeting got scheduled. So let's just say it was 2:00 on a Friday afternoon that this 30-minute meeting ends up on my calendar. So most of that morning, Brian and I do podcast recordings on Fridays, and then things freed up around 1:30 p.m. Okay, so like my meetings were over, podcast recordings were done, and I finally free up at 1:30. Now, there's a 30-minute window between that and the 2 o'clock call. Now, I have to record a couple of introductions for podcasts that we've already created and write up the show notes and also write up the emails. Now, if I'm in a flow state, I could probably get that done, all of that done in an hour for a couple of episodes. But because there was only 30 minutes between 1:30 and 2:30, I didn't have enough time to get that started. So I was like, well, I'm not going to start that then. I'm going to go do, emails or something like kind of minor in nature. And so I kind of puttered around, wasn't really effective for that half an hour. 2 o'clock, the call rolls around. We have our call. I think we finished 5 minutes late, so it's 2:35. And I have my next call, which is a 2-hour call from 3 to 5. I've got a 25-minute window now. And again, can't get the work done for the podcast that I wanted to get done. And when I had a chance to step back and look, if I hadn't said yes to that 30-minute meeting, I would have had an hour and a half, which was more than enough time to get those podcast recordings done, all the show notes and the email stuff. But because that meeting was wedged in there, I was ineffective in the 2 30-minute increments around it and the 30 minutes during the call I didn't want to take. Now, at 5 o'clock or 5:15, when like all my meetings had ended, I still had the responsibility of doing the podcast intros and the show notes and the emails. But I was tired at the end of the day. My best juice and my best brain power was already gone. So when I sat down to record and to write, it took me 2 hours to do versus the hour that it could have taken if I had that time open on like early in that Friday afternoon. So when I stepped back and looked at all of this, I was like, shit, like that 30-minute commitment on the surface, it's only 30 minutes. It seemed like it actually cost me about an hour and a half or 2 hours of extra time. And this is how doing things out of obligation can get so sneaky in terms of stealing your time. When I look at the men who are in the mastermind or the men and women who I have a chance to speak to in large corporate organizations or in entrepreneurial groups, one of the big challenges they have is finding the time to get meaningful work done, to do the big picture projects, to have the time to get into something complex, which sometimes could take a half an hour before you hit your stride, and then spending the next hour in flow. If you don't have these chunks of time because there are these 30-minute, 20-minute, 60-minute obligation meetings that you're taking because it's uncomfortable to say no, that's how the most important things in your work and in your life constantly get sacrificed. And so a 30-minute meeting on the surface can actually steal quite a bit of your life force. It can steal the opportunity for you to operate from your greatest energy and to live from a place of purpose. So let's take this a step further with some workplace research and the impact that obligation could have on people's performance in work. So Callie Simon, who's the chief operating officer of my business, is a huge fan of Adam Grant. And Adam Grant is University of Pennsylvania professor, in multiple TED Talks, a number of famous books like Give and Take and the Originals. And in his book, Give and Take, which was a huge hit back in 2013, some of its accolades were Financial Times Book of the Year, the Wall Street Journal's favorite books of 2013, Forbes' Most Dynamic Social Innovation Initiatives of 2013. The book Give and Take, its subtitle is Why Helping Others Drives Our Success. And it breaks down the two categories of people in business, givers and takers. And in the article that Callie sent me, which was in Harvard Business Review, broke down an excerpt from the book about how givers are oftentimes both the best performers and the worst performers in the workplace, both the best and the worst. And the difference between the two is really boundaries, right? The people who are the lowest performing, but also the biggest givers in the business, oftentimes were giving because of timidity. They were afraid of saying no. They made themselves available for everything instead of picking and choosing what they'd be available for. And over the course of time, they lose their own sense of prioritization of what's important for them. And over the course of time, they get outwitted or manipulated by shrewd takers. Now, the people who were the givers at the top of the organization were the ones who knew how to give from a place of purpose, who knew how to give and establish boundaries. And when they gave with the boundaries and also allowed others to know what they were available for and didn't allow too much empathy for the needs of someone else to override their own needs, then they ended up getting their own work done and also contributed to others, which then came back and paid bounties and spades on top of that. That's how they were ending up at the top of the organization. So if you think about your life or your work from a sense of what are you doing that you don't want to be doing, and if you're doing so many things that you don't want to, whether it's attending meetings or helping people or giving your time when you'd rather be doing something else, either you're just a dick and you only care about yourself, which I don't anticipate you are if you're listening to this podcast, or chances are you have a hard time saying no because you feel that saying no, someone will take their affection away from you. They won't like you anymore. Maybe you won't be a good partner at work. I know that was a big thing when I was at Prudential, was being a good partner. And saying no was like, kind of, how could you say no? Like, you're not being a good partner, even if it was at the expense of your work. So I always went back to this concept of what gives me my greatest energy. And if I kept finding that my days were filled with events, activities, with people who took me to the other end of the spectrum, away from my greatest energy, then I knew that there was something the ball was in my court. There was something I either could be doing that I wasn't, or I wasn't doing something that I could be that would allow me to step back into my greatest energy. And so now to share with you like how I'm kind of taking this to the extreme level. A few weeks ago, I took a flight down to North Carolina to do a week's worth of vacation for myself. And I went in this secluded cabin that I rented in the woods where there was a creek running down the property. There were wild turkeys in the front yard. I had a chance to do all of the things that I love for the entire week, right? Hiking, reading, meditating, drinking really good coffee, making healthy food at home, and just sitting and being peaceful, right? For that entire week. And when I came back from that week, full of inspiration, full of ideas for the future of my business, full of concepts for the podcast and interview guests and all sorts of ideas without even actively wanting to think about business. I actually disconnected from work altogether, but all these ideas just came to me effortlessly through doing the things that I loved, the things that gave me my greatest energy. When I came back home and I looked at my work week, I was like, maybe I have my life structured backwards. Why am I relegating the things that give me my greatest energy to the weekends, vacations, and maybe my morning routines? What if I were to flip the script and make all of my time, like 80% of my time on Monday through Friday, the things that give me my greatest energy, and only spent 2 to 4 hours a day working? So that's what I've been doing for the last 2 weeks. And I have to tell you, it's been kind of extraordinary, the new levels of creation, the expediency with which I get things done. Like the work stuff I do need to get done gets done so much more quickly because I'm energized and inspired and because I have space and time. So I'm doing this extreme exercise of I'm flipping the script to spend and organize my life around my greatest energy so that I could spend it 75 to 80% of my time in it. Now, I'm going to let this thing run out for a few more weeks, months, maybe longer. Maybe this is my new normal, depending on how the results show up. I can tell you the results of how I feel are amazing. And then the other results in my life around income, abundance, growing this podcast, growing the reach, getting 10 million men on that path of doing inner work. I'll let you know. I'll keep you posted on how that's going. But the big part of making that shift, and one of the harder parts, was relieving the guilt of actually doing things, quote, the way I'm obligated to. I'm obligated to work in a certain way. but I'm not morally or ethically obligated to do any work in a certain way. I can author that because of the lifestyle I've chosen as an entrepreneur and to run my own business. I can choose it now any way I want. And so when I illuminated this definition of obligation, I'm like, there's no moral or ethical responsibility here. Actually, I'm obligated, if I want to use that definition, I am obligated to do the things that give me my greatest energy. Because that's what I'm of best use to you, to the people around me, to the future of working with men, to the publishing and promotion of the book On Purpose Leadership, is when I'm lit up and fired up. And when I'm doing things that I'm obligated to do that I don't want to, I'm the opposite of that. So I'd encourage you to look at your life. And the next time that an obligation, quote, something that feels like an obligation comes your way, in that split second before you make your decision, I want you to slow down the game and really calculate, is this something that you're saying yes to because you want to do it and because you feel like maybe you have a responsibility to it? Or are you doing it because you fear saying no, like I did to that 30-minute meeting, which ended up catapulting me into 2 hours of wasted time and in a bunch of emotional distress as a result of it? At least it did give me a really good podcast, or hopefully a podcast that you enjoyed. It gave me an idea for an episode. So there is that. But the next time you find yourself in that situation, pause. And if it doesn't hit that greatest energy meter, then you have a choice to make. And sometimes in the short term, saying no is harder, but I can tell you, and I can attest to you as someone who is a reformed obligation doer, life is a hell of a lot more fun this way. Hey, On Purpose Leadership, my second book is available for pre-order right now. It drops on September 22nd. And if you buy a copy and send me your receipt at dominic@dominicq.com, you'll get a whole bunch of bonuses that come with the book, like worksheets that allow you to put the book into practice. There's going to be some guided meditations and a couple of webinars on how to design your morning routine and evening routine. The book is On Purpose Leadership. Master the art of leading yourself so that you can inspire and impact others. You know that a great man lives his life on purpose. He knows how to lead himself so that he doesn't have to worry about speaking or telling others what to do. He just leads by example, and others are inspired by his actions. So if you are a great man, an aspiring great man, you're going to want to pick up On Purpose Leadership and go to anywhere you can buy books online. Get the receipt, forward it to me at dominic@dominicq.com, and we'll send you a whole bunch of bonuses to put the book into practice.